Tariff beating U.S. opportunity. Hey everyone, it's Wolfgang. So I wanted to cover this subject because people are wondering what the future holds because of the trade realignment that's being caused by the tariff situation. And keep in mind, it's not just the U.S. that has tariffs. Most countries have tariffs. The U.S. is getting the spotlight because the U.S. has changed the tariff policy, but all countries have tariffs. So please keep that in mind. So there's a worldwide trade realignment because the U.S. is changing its tariff policy. Trade realignment means the places where companies like U.S. retailers get their products from is realigning. It's being changed. Trade realignment means a U.S. Retailer, Walmart, for example, they are realigning where they get the stuff that they sell. Instead of getting artificially cheap imports, they're going to be looking for onshored or reshored U.S. Suppliers. So it's being caused, again, by the tariff situation that is changing. All countries have tariffs. The U.S. has tariffs. The U.S. is changing its tariff policy, and that's creating this need for U.S.-based retailers to find new sources or to at least consider new sources for the products they sell. It's also known as supply chain reshoring because products that retailers sold used to come from offshore. Now they're going to be coming from onshore. And here's the main reason. Okay, the main reason is this. Artificially cheap products that were imported are no longer going to be artificially cheap. And so their prices will rise, making it possible for US-based manufacturers to offer the same products. And retailers in the US, like Walmart, will now have a choice. Instead of only having an offshore provider, they will have an onshore provider of products they sell. Okay, so there are U.S. startups, and you can find some of these online. If you search online for reshored U.S. startups, as an example, you can probably find some names of startups that are taking advantage of the trade realignment. Because whenever there's a big change in the economy, it always makes investment opportunity. And that's what we're talking about in this video, tariff beating U.S. opportunity. So there are investors that are going to be investing in U.S. startups that are replacing imports. So in other words, because cheap imports are being replaced, or at least competing more fairly with U.S.-based products, there will be new startups in the U.S. to provide goods to U.S.-based retailers. These startups that are going to be manufacturing onshore in the U.S. will no longer have to compete with the artificially cheap imported goods. And I say artificially cheap because, as I pointed out in the last couple videos or so, places like China have artificially low labor costs. Mexico is kind of the same. So that's going to change because the U.S. has lost so many jobs. The leadership of the country is trying to fix that to make sure that U.S. workers have some options for employment. Okay, so U.S. manufacturers are going to be supplying U.S. retailers. So instead of made in China or made elsewhere for everything that you buy in, like Walmart, there will now be U.S. manufacturers. Okay, and U.S.-based startups, they will get investment from large investors. And I'm going to introduce, or at least mention some very large U.S.-based investors who are investing in U.S. manufacturing startups, the reshoring manufacturers. Okay, so who will be the customers of these startups, of these new U.S. companies producing goods for Walmart? Okay, the customers will be the retailers, right? Lowe's, Target, Etsy, these are online. eBay is online. Amazon's an online retailer. Costco, Walmart, Home Depot, and other retailers, they will now be realigning where they get their products from. They're no longer going to be, we're only buying stuff that comes from offshore, from artificially cheap, because there are no longer any artificially cheap products, because the tariffs have eliminated that. That's the whole idea with the tariffs. Okay, so the products that are going to be supplied by will be supplied by reshored U.S. manufacturers, like I've been saying, and they will be price competitive. These U.S.-based manufacturers will be competitive because U.S.-based manufacturers don't have tariffs on them, right? U.S.-based manufacturers do not have any tariffs placed on them. And so, for example, some of the large car companies figured this out a long time ago. Any foreign automaker that is producing cars in U.S. factories, they figured this out a long time ago. If we simply start producing our products inside the U.S., we will not be subject to tariffs. And that has worked out very well for a lot of foreign car companies, right? We all know some of those car companies that are producing manufacturing in the U.S. Okay, so here are some investor groups that are investing in the trade realignment. These are investors, large investors, very large investors, who are going to be investing in U.S. startups that are replacing previously imported goods. Okay, so Brookfield, these guys have almost $1 trillion under management. They're going to be investing in startups producing consumer goods, U.S.-based consumer goods, okay? So these guys, huge investors, that's a lot of money, right? They're going to be investing in U.S.-based consumer products. So who sells consumer products? Walmart, Costco, Target, Amazon, eBay, Etsy, Lowe's, Home Depot, and so on. Blackstone Group. We've all heard of Blackstone, right? Blackstone Group is already investing in the supply chain reshoring, the coming back to the U.S. of manufacturing. And again, U.S.-based products are now going to be price competitive because the artificially cheap imported goods are gone. They're no longer going to be available, right? So Blackstone Group is putting money to work. And you've got to realize something, okay? Groups with this kind of financial background, they're not stupid, right? They wouldn't be making investments in this reshoring unless there was opportunity, unless there was solid opportunity. Because the thing is, right now, as we speak, the U.S. and China are having their meeting in, I think, Switzerland to discuss the tariff situation. But the expectations are very low that anything is going to change. If you look online and you look up optimism, U.S.-China trade talks, Switzerland, you'll get a sense that, okay, there's not a lot of expectation that the 145% tariff situation is going to change this week, at least not this weekend. These huge investors would not be making large strategic investments in U.S.-based startups unless they were pretty darn sure things were going to be solid. Blackstone Group also is going to be investing in U.S. startups producing consumer goods and electronics. The Carlyle Group, also very well known, also a lot of money to invest. They're going to invest in U.S.-based clean energy, manufacturing, and consumer goods. So you see, most of these guys are investing in consumer goods. And why? Because U.S.-based consumer goods will now be price competitive with anything imported because the cheap imported stuff has been eliminated. The artificially cheap imported stuff is gone. So Carlyle Group, Apollo Global, also investing in U.S. reshored manufacture, consumer goods and metal products. Okay, so I didn't have room for all of these large investor groups. Here are some other ones. Goldman Sachs, same thing. They are investing in U.S. startups who are going to be replacing previously imported goods. Goldman Sachs, Bain Capital, Warburg Pincus, and others, okay, are all going to be investing in this new opportunity that's been created because the U.S. government said, we've lost too many jobs for our citizens. We're going to get them back. We're going to stop the unfair trade. Because remember what I said at the beginning. Every country has tariffs. It's not just the U.S. The only thing that's new is the U.S. is changing its tariff policy. That's the only thing that's different. Because every country has always had tariffs on imports. It's just that the U.S. was too accommodating. Was just way too accommodating. It just eliminated too much of our jobs base. There are too many U.S. citizens who would love to have a decent job, and they don't, but now they will, because these large investor groups are investing in startups that are going to be replacing previously imported goods. There's another thing I wanted to mention. The U.S. government is going to be subsidizing, they actually already are subsidizing computer chips and clean energy manufacturing. And so there have been a lot of announcements by large companies that are reshoring manufacturing to the U.S., making huge investments. What was the one that the Japanese company owned by that billionaire, what's his name? I can't remember. But there's a very large Japanese company that has pledged to invest $500 billion in reshoring, supply chain reshoring, U.S. manufacturing jobs. This is really cool for us because for the longest time, the U.S. has been, they say nice guys finish last, right? If you go to a party and there's some nice guy there handing out $1,000 to every stranger he meets because he wants to be thought well of, That's a nice guy tactic, right? I'm going to be a nice guy. How do I be a nice guy? I give everybody access to my markets for nothing. That's over. It's over. It's not going to. So the weekend meeting with China, do not expect anything dramatic in terms of any changes to the 145% tariffs. They're not going to change it. These groups are relying on the fact that the new tariff changes in the U.S. are going to remain. Maybe not to the same magnitude. Maybe that 145 will be negotiated down some. But these large groups, Blackstone, Brookfield, Carlyle, Apollo, Goldman Sachs, and so on, they're not stupid. They wouldn't be making investments in U.S.-based startups that are replacing imports unless they knew that U.S. tariff policy, the changes being made now, are going to be sticky. They're going to stay around. So the U.S. is no longer going to be the nice guy who finishes last. The U.S. is now going to adopt the same sort of tariff posture that most other countries already have. So that's the big change. If you have any questions about this, there are a lot of these very large investors who are going to be taking advantage of it. So the thing is, if you want to take advantage of these opportunities, you can do what these large investors are doing on a smaller scale. It will take some investing tactics. I'm not going to go into here, but you could do a search online for, how do I invest in reshoring, right? Because that's what this is. It's a realignment of trade. It's supply chain reshoring. You could do a search online. How can I invest in supply chain reshoring in the U.S. and get some investing ideas? Because if these huge investors are doing it, man, you can bet there's a lot of opportunity there. So I wish everyone the best of luck, and I really want to thank everyone for watching, and have a great day.